Nobody knew Clint Eastwood could play piano. Johnny Carson was making jokes about it. But when Eastwood played the first chords, the entire studio fell into complete silence. It was March 1985. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Studio 6B in Burbank. Another Thursday night. Another lineup of celebrity guests promoting movies and books and albums. The rhythm was familiar, comfortable, practiced over 23 years of hosting. Clint Eastwood was the main guest. He'd come to promote a new Western he'd directed. The interview had been going well, Johnny asking about horses and stunts, Clint responding with his trademark laconic humor, the audience laughing at all the right moments. They were nearing the end of the segment. Johnny was wrapping up, about to thank Clint and go to commercial. Standard procedure. Safe television. And then Clint said something that changed everything. "Johnny, before I go, there's something I'd like to do." Johnny smiled, expecting a prepared bit. Maybe Clint would pull out a rope trick or demonstrate how to draw a prop gun. "Sure, Clint. What V you got?" Eastwood gestured toward the corner of the stage where a grand piano sat. It was there for the musical guests later in the show, a beautiful black Steinway that Doc Severinsen's band sometimes used for special performances. "I'd like to play something," Clint said simply. The audience laughed. They thought it was a setup for a joke. Ed McMahon chuckled from his seat beside Johnny's desk. Even Johnny grinned, looking for the punchline. "You play piano?" Johnny asked, the skepticism clear in his voice but gentle, expecting Clint to reveal this was leading somewhere funny. "Not well," Clint said, standing up from the guest chair. "But well enough." He walked across the stage toward the piano. The audience was still laughing, waiting for the reveal. Johnny looked at Ed, who shrugged, equally confused. The cameras stayed on Eastwood as he settled onto the piano bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed his hands on the keys. That's when the laughter began to fade. Because Clint Eastwood's posture at that piano wasn't the posture of someone about to bang out chopsticks for laughs. It was the posture of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He played a single chord. Then another. Then a melody began to emerge. Slow. Haunting. Impossibly beautiful. A jazz composition from the 1940s, the kind of piece that belonged in smoky nightclubs where the truly gifted musicians played after midnight. Carson stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. Johnny's smile vanished. His hand, which had been gesturing toward the camera for the commercial break, lowered slowly to the desk. His entire body went still. The audience stopped laughing. 300 people who had been chuckling seconds ago now sat in complete silence, watching Clint Eastwood. Movie star, director, the man who played the man with no name, play piano with the kind of skill that spoke of years of practice, of deep understanding, of real talent. Ed McMahon leaned forward in his chair, mouth slightly open. Doc Severinsen, standing with his band in the back, lowered his trumpet and just stared. But it was Johnny's reaction that the cameras caught. The close-up that would be replayed for decades. His face transforming from confusion to recognition to something deeper. Something that looked like grief breaking through a dam that had held for 40 years. Because Johnny Carson recognized that melody. And the last time he'd heard it, his father had been alive. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1945. Johnny Carson wasn't always Johnny Carson, king of late-night television. In 1945, he was a 19-year-old sailor in the Navy, stationed in the Pacific during the final months of World War II. He was a skinny kid from Nebraska who'd enlisted the day after his 18th birthday, convinced the war would be over before he saw any action. He was wrong. By the time Johnny reached his assignment, the war was brutal and grinding and seemingly endless. He served on a carrier, working in communications, listening to radio chatter during battles, hearing things no 19-year-old should have to hear. He wrote letters home constantly. To his mother Ruth. To his younger sister Catherine. But especially to his father, Homer Kit Carson. Kit Carson was a power company manager in Norfolk, Nebraska. quiet man. Practical. Not given to emotional displays. But he loved his son with a fierce pride that he rarely expressed in words. Instead, he played piano. Kit wasn't a professional musician, just a man who taught himself to play by ear, who could sit down after dinner and fill their small house with music. He played old standards, jazz pieces, songs from the big band era. Johnny had grown up falling asleep to the sound of his father's piano drifting up the stairs. When Johnny shipped out, Kit started including sheet music in his letters. Not the full scores, just the melody lines sketched out in Kit's careful handwriting. He'd write, "Learning this one. We'll play it for you when you're home." Johnny kept those letters in his footlocker. Every single one. The paper worn from being read and reread during long nights at sea. The sheet music fragments representing a promise. His father was waiting, learning songs to play for him, believing Johnny would make it home. In August 1945, Johnny was in the South Pacific when he got the telegram. Heart attack. Sudden. His father was 51 years old. He'd been at work, collapsed at his desk, was gone before the ambulance arrived. Johnny couldn't go home. The Navy wouldn't grant leave. The war was ending but hadn't ended yet, and they needed every man at his post. Johnny Carson missed his father's funeral. He missed saying goodbye. He missed everything. When he finally made it home 3 months later, honorably discharged, the house felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with his father's absence. It was the silence. No piano. His mother had covered the instrument with a sheet because she couldn't bear to look at it. Johnny lifted the sheet. On the music stand was a piece of paper, the last thing his father had been learning. A jazz composition from the 40s, complex and beautiful, something Kit had clearly been working on for weeks based on the pencil marks and notes in the margins. At the bottom, in his father's handwriting, "For Johnny's homecoming." Kit Carson had been learning a song to play for his son's return. And he'd died 3 weeks before Johnny made it home. The song was never finished. The homecoming never happened. Johnny folded that sheet music and put it in his wallet. He carried it for 2 years. Then, when he started working in television, when he began building the career that would make him famous, he locked it away. Too painful. Too much of a reminder of everything he'd lost. For 40 years, Johnny Carson never mentioned his father's piano playing. Never talked about those letters from the Pacific. Never told anyone about the unfinished song. He built a wall around that grief and never let anyone see behind it. Until tonight. March 1985. When Clint Eastwood sat at a piano on the Tonight Show stage and began playing the exact melody Kit Carson had been learning when he died. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Clint's fingers moved across the keys with surprising grace. This wasn't a movie star dabbling. This was real skill, real understanding of the music. The melody unfolded with all its complex beauty. The kind of piece that requires both technical ability and emotional depth. Johnny sat frozen behind his desk. Tears were running down his face. He didn't wipe them away. Didn't try to hide them. He just sat there, gripping the edge of his desk, listening to his dead father's song being played 40 years later by Clint Eastwood. The control room was in chaos. Producer Fred DeCordova was shouting into his headset. "What's happening? Why is Clint playing piano? Why is Johnny crying? Do we cut to commercial?" Director Bobby Quinn stared at the monitors. "No," he said quietly. "Keep rolling. I don't know what this is, but it matters." On stage, Ed McMahon had tears streaming down his face. He didn't know why Johnny was crying, but he knew his friend well enough to understand this wasn't about the music alone. Clint played for 2 minutes. When the final notes faded, he sat still for a moment, hands resting on the keys. Then he turned to look at Johnny. The studio was completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Johnny's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "How did you know that song?" Clint stood up from the piano bench and walked back to the guest chair. He sat down slowly, his usual stoic expression softened by something that looked like understanding. "My father taught it to me," Clint said quietly. "In 1945. He was a piano player, worked clubs in Oakland. He learned this piece specifically because it was something new, something he could master and feel proud of." He paused. "He died in 1946. Heart attack. I was 16. This was the last song he ever taught me." The audience gasped. The connection suddenly clear. Two men. Two fathers. Two piano players. Two deaths. The same song connecting across 4 decades. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny opened his desk drawer. The same drawer where he kept his interview notes, his spare reading glasses, his emergency cue cards. He reached past all of that, and pulled out something he'd kept hidden there for 23 years. A piece of sheet music. Old, yellowed, the edges worn from being handled countless times in private moments when no one was watching. He held it up. His hand was shaking. "This," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion, "is the last thing my father was working on when he died. 1945. Heart attack while I was overseas. I never got to hear him play it. I didn't even know he was learning it until I came home and found it on the piano." He looked at the paper, at his father's handwriting still visible after 4 decades. At the bottom, he wrote "For Johnny's homecoming. He was going to play this for me when I got back from the war. But he died 3 weeks before I made it home." The audience was crying now. Not just a few people, nearly everyone. The kind of collective grief that happens when strangers suddenly understand they're witnessing something sacred. Clint Eastwood, that granite-faced man who made his career playing emotionless gunslingers, was crying too. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I had no idea. I wanted to show you I could play. I thought you'd get a kick out of it." Johnny shook his head. "You gave me something I've been waiting 40 years to hear. My father's song. Finished. Played the way he meant it to be played." He looked directly at Clint. "Thank you. But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming." Johnny stood up from his desk. Not the casual standing he did for commercial breaks. This was deliberate, purposeful. He walked around the desk, across the stage, and extended his hand to Clint. Eastwood stood. The two men shook hands. Then, in a moment that would define both their legacies, Johnny pulled Clint into an embrace. Two Hollywood titans, two intensely private men, holding each other on live television, while 300 people watched in reverent silence. When they separated, Johnny turned to the audience. "We're going to do something we've never done before," he said. "We're going to end the show right now. No more segments. No more jokes. Just this." Fred de Cordova's voice exploded in Bobby Quinn's headset. "He can't just end the show. We have 20 minutes left. We have sponsors. We have—" "Let him," Bobby said simply. "Let him." Johnny addressed the camera directly. "If you're watching at home, thank you for being part of this. Sometimes television gives us something more than entertainment. Sometimes it gives us completion." He held up the sheet music one more time. "I'm going to frame this now. Not hide it anymore. Because Clint just taught me something my father tried to teach me 40 years ago. Grief doesn't heal by hiding it. It heals by honoring it." The audience rose. Standing ovation. Not the excited applause of entertainment, but the quiet, reverent applause of people who understood they'd witnessed something that transcended television. Clint extended his hand one more time. "Your father would be proud of you, Johnny." Johnny's voice broke. "Yours too, Clint." The show ended there. Credits rolled over silence. No band music. No jokes. Just the image of two men standing together, connected by fathers they'd both lost and a melody that had waited 40 years to be finished. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The next day, Johnny had the sheet music professionally framed. He hung it in his office where he could see it every day. Below it, a small brass plate. Kit Carson's last song completed by Clint Eastwood, March 1985. When Johnny retired in 1992, he gave the frame to Clint. "Keep it," he said. "Our fathers would want it that way." It hangs in Eastwood's home today. A reminder that sometimes the most important performances happen when we least expect them.